The following work is brought to you by ScriptCrib. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon for more information on our works. And as always, if you want to know more about what we're doing and be up to date when we release it, always like and subscribe. He felt a groan escape his lips as he slowly opened his eyes. He was lying in a pool of sticky, warm blood. His ears were ringing with the deathly stillness that had replaced the thumping music from earlier. Everywhere he looked, there were bodies strewn across the ground in various states of dismemberment and decay. Men and women who were sharing in dance and jubilation were now on the cold asphalt. Among them stood a figure whose arm lay detached from its body. Samuel, his former friend whose lifeless eyes stared blankly into oblivion. Zack could see the deep gash that ran down his chest, surrounded by stains of freshly spilled crimson. He had betrayed Zack and met his fate, but Zack couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. Samuel was murdered, just as the rest of the citizens around him, but he still felt he deserved better. Zack stood up and staggered a bit, regaining his equilibrium from the blow he took to the back of his head. He slowly rubbed his scalp while inspecting the carnage around him. The thugs with Samuel had also met the same fate as their boss. However, as he shifted his gaze around, he noticed Jim was still standing in the building, cowering in a corner near the window. Without a second thought, Zack glanced around to find the door to the building. Once acquired, he sprinted toward it, leaping over the dismembered bodies in his way. He pulled open the door, revealing a staircase that was coated in blood. More bodies were strewn about as Zack ran past them, ascending the stairs as quickly as he could to reach the third floor where Jim was cowering in fear. Once at the door, Zack raised his boot and drove it into the door, kicking it in to reveal the bloodbath before him. "No," he said as he ran in to find Jim lying over a desk with blood pooling around it. The attacker, the man he saw earlier, stood prominently in his long coat and long-brimmed hat. In his right hand, he carried a short sword that dripped the blood of his victims on the ground. His eyes glowed yellow as he locked them onto Zack. He placed his sword back in the sleeve of his jacket and walked toward a window, turning away from Zack. "What are you?" inquired Zack as he approached the window. His daggers were still on his side as he stared at the assassin, feeling an awkward sense of safety around him. As the two stood in silence, the Outlander staring out the window and Zack staring at the Outlander, a Poe air transport emerged from behind a tall building in the distance. Spotlights descended on the corpses in the street with Zack turning his head away from the Outlander and over to Poe. The spotlights moved through the corpses and up the building, eventually stopping on them. "I don't know if you understand me, but you're about to have severely high-trained, well-armed soldiers coming after you," stated Zack softly. The Outlander sighed and nodded, the edge of his long-brimmed hat moving up and down in affirmation. On the ground, several ground transports rolled through the streets, stopping at the corpses as the air transport kept the spotlight on them. Victor ran through the halls of Poe headquarters toward his locker, having just left his apartment. The broadcast reached all of the Poe soldiers who were on leave. Adrenaline was flowing freely throughout the soldiers as a moment of glory could be had for whoever could subdue the Butcher of Soda City, as he had been aptly named. The Outlander, now known as Rami Daragaz, was located in a remote quadrant of Soda City. The higher-ups of Poe believed the Outlander was pinned, though Victor was skeptical. He had bested him once, and he was confident he could best him again, but he was worried about the rest of the forces. Victor opened up his locker with several of the other Poe soldiers around him placing their gear on. He reached into the locker and grabbed his first set of gear, the equipment he used to cover and protect the chips in his back. He slipped the shirt on over his head and pulled it down to his waist. He reached for the pants that matched it while keeping his eyes on the rest of the equipment in his locker. With his pants on and the belt buckled, he exhaled slowly while looking at the other gear. "No," he muttered before reaching past it and grabbing a thin jacket. "No what?" asked Justin as he approached from Victor's right. Victor scoffed and looked back at the gear in his locker. "I'm not wearing the suit, Justin. I'm a better soldier without it." "Excuse me?" asked Justin. "They won't let you on the transport without your gear on, Vic." Victor scoffed again and glanced back at the equipment one last time. "Let them try and stop me." Justin didn't acknowledge Victor's latest comment, instead keeping to himself as he focused on what was in front of him in his locker. "You ready to do this again?" asked Justin as he exhaled heavily. The smell of alcohol permeated off of his breath. Victor smirked while keeping his eyes focused on the inside of his locker. "I think so," he replied softly. The dangers of engaging the Outlander again were weighing on him, but he knew vigilance was his only option. He was the Poe soldier who bested Rami Daragaz once. He was the Poe soldier expected to do it again. Justin closed the door of his locker and turned back to Victor. "I think you may need a little more than a 'I think so,' Vic," said Justin confidently. "I think this may be the moment where you have to show all of Poe who the baddest man on the playground really is. Especially if you're not going to wear your suit." Victor placed his right hand in his left and cracked his knuckles. "We don't know what this guy is, Justin, but we do know that if I turn these things in my back on, I can stand toe-to-toe with him. I've already made him bleed once. Next time I'll take off his head." "So the lack of your equipment is because you want to punch him without any resistance?" inquired Justin curiously. Victor nodded slowly. "That's exactly right." He turned away from Justin and stepped through the locker room with his comrade right behind him, moving past several of the other soldiers as they all put on their heavy armor and sensors. The soldiers all looked at Victor as he walked past them in his only set of armor, the gear meant to protect his cybernetics. Victor and Justin moved side by side down the hallway toward the disembarkation area, where they would coordinate with other squadrons. Once there, Victor's eyes locked onto the first squadron he saw, the one belonging to Kron and his comrades. "And there's the man of the hour," announced Buck as he watched Victor and Justin approach from down the hallway near the locker room. "And he came without any of his equipment on," muttered Ancient as he glanced up from fidgeting with his rifle. "You going to be joining us or just cheering us on from headquarters?" Buck smirked and walked up to Victor, analyzing his attire. Kron stood off to the side with Red, both looking at several monitors tracking the whereabouts of Rami Derrigaz. "I don't think that's Poe-approved attire, friend. You may want to turn back and equip yourself before you head out into the fight," inserted Buck. Victor smiled and held his position in front of Buck with an aura of confidence. "It took watching all of you getting your ass kicked for me to realize that the equipment we've been relying on might be second best in this fight. I think this might be the time to use the gifts which have been bestowed upon me." Buck scoffed and kept his eyes trained on Victor. "Oh, so those gifts that the doc gave you?" "Yeah, those gifts that allowed me to actually land a punch on this guy," affirmed Victor confidently. "And once I see him, I'll land another, and another, and eventually I'll knock his head off." Kron stepped up and placed his hand on Victor's shoulder, moving in between Victor and Buck before the tension could build any further. "I think what Buck might be trying to say, Victor, is how unwise it is for you to be heading out into the field without any gear on to monitor your biometrics. If headquarters can't monitor how well your body is performing, they can't ensure that you are maximizing your productivity." Victor shifted his eyes away from Buck and over to Kron. "I don't think my biometrics are really the issue here, Kron," Victor countered defensively. "I think the issue might be that I have some equipment sewn into my body infused with my spinal cord and muscular and skeletal systems that make you uncomfortable." Kron took in a deep breath while keeping his eyes firmly trained on Victor. "We can discuss what makes me uncomfortable later, Victor. For now, we need to handle this outlander." "Damn straight, Kron," affirmed Victor as he stepped past him and over to the monitor where Justin was looking over Rami Derrigaz's movement with Red. "What are you seeing?" Justin folded his arms across his chest as he stared at the monitors. "Honestly, he's standing in an area, not moving. It's pretty odd." Red chimed in. Victor furrowed his brows and leaned closer to the screen. "Do we have any idea why he's just standing there?" "Not yet," replied Justin with a shake of his head, "but we're working on it. We're trying to get an idea if there's anything else around there that would give us an idea. Something that seems out of place. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for answers, guys. We need to load up and get this guy before he decides to slice up any more of the population," said Victor as he stepped away from the monitor and over towards the door. "Hey, Kron, you going on the ground?" Kron nodded emphatically. "Of course. You can't pay me to get into one of those air death traps." Victor shrugged, almost agreeing with Kron. "That's fair. Justin, let's get to Dave and get up in the sky. Maybe we can get to him first before the ground transports spook him into the rafters." "Justin, keep your headset on so we can communicate," ordered Kron as he and his team gathered their equipment. "It looks like Victor has his heart set on going in without any of his gear, so we can at least use you for your eyes." David, the pilot of their transport, was already in the cockpit when Justin and Victor arrived. The hum of the engines filled the air as they strapped themselves in and prepared for takeoff. "All right, buckle up," called David over the intercom. Victor and Justin sat in their chairs with monitors on both sides. Both men strapped themselves into the air transport as quickly as they could, knowing David would waste little time in taking off. "We'll be in the air in 3, 2, 1. The transport lifted off the ground with a jolt, causing Victor and Justin to grip their armrests tightly. As they ascended higher toward the top of the rafters, Justin's heart started racing. He had been on many missions before, but this time it was different. This time, they were going after a man who had already killed several people with only a single blade. "All right, we're approaching the location," announced David. I'm going to bring us down low so that you can get a better look. Victor turned to Justin. What do you see? Justin squinted at the monitor, trying to make out any details in the dimly lit area. There's two guys, just standing there, he said slowly. Bodies are scattered throughout the streets, but there are two life forms just looking at each other. Victor stared at the monitor as David tried to get into position. That's odd, he muttered. Hey guys, the next part's going to begin in just a second, but if you're enjoying this and you like stuff in this genre, why don't you check out By Gods and Kings, Shadow's Bastion by Karen Graham. The War of the Gods has come to a head with 9 of the 11 gods involved in open conflicts with one another. The god of order, Darien, with his allies, Xylene, Saeria, and Talgus, have crafted the plans to create a prison of souls off the banks of the Sariak River. Using 2 of his priests as the conduits for the plan, Darien puts his scheme into motion to create the ultimate bastion of shadows, the Sunshire Stockades. You can find this work on Amazon, the By Gods and Kings podcast channel, or you can find it on the Script Crib Publishing YouTube channel. Now, we continue with the next part. On the street, Kron sat in the back of the ground transport as it sped through Soda City. The gray buildings and neon signs appeared as normal, but an ominous aura filled the area as they sped toward their destination. Buck was in the driver's seat, as always, with Ancient at his side. The road was much smoother than the surface of the earth where they traditionally patrolled. Cars and other vehicles lined the sides of the streets, with several citizens gazing out the windows of their domiciles. We're approaching our destination, announced Ancient from the navigator's chair. Sensors are showing signs of life on both sides of the street, but ahead, sensors are faint. What about the heat registry? How many warm spots can we detect? Inquired Kron as he leaned forward in his chair. Ancient began glancing over the data before him while Red shifted in his seat to inspect the monitors beside him. Stuttered Ancient, not prepared to answer Kron. There are several heat signatures that are just slightly below what is compatible for human life, Red chimed in, breaking the awkward tension with Ancient fumbling for data. It looks like there are quite a few fresh corpses. Kron closed his eyes and sighed. That's regrettable. Buck glanced over his shoulder and shrugged. Kron, I think it was inevitable. There was no way we could have gotten enough bodies there to stop this guy. Kron looked over at Buck and sighed heavily. We're on our way now. All we can do is try and stop this guy from killing anyone else. Buck nodded and faced the road as they came up on their destination, a center of a quadrant where the remains of several citizens were scattered about. The door to the transport opened with 4 soldiers disembarking as quickly as they could, with the other transports coming up behind them. This is an absolute bloodbath, muttered Kron as his feet hit the pavement. Sensors on. We need to know if any of these citizens are alive. Yes, sir, affirmed Red as he followed Kron out of the transport and into the streets. Ancient and Buck were close behind as Kron and Red led the way through the piles of bodies, noticing that many of them were dismembered and decapitated. The 4 soldiers moved in a square formation, with each member taking up a corner. They watched intently through their visors to detect any movement, while their sensors scanned the area for any detectable signs of life. Overhead, several air transports surveyed the area, but on the ground, Kron led the squadrons deeper into the area. All squadrons, take care. I'm pretty sure that Rami guy is out here somewhere, announced Kron as they moved slowly through the piles of bodies. Rami Darigaz, clarified Buck. Yeah, him, continued Kron. Keep your eyes peeled or you're going to find your head detached from your body. Buck had his body turned toward a large, open building with bodies scattered in the doorway. Hey, Kron, this door is open and there are bodies spilling out. Kron turned to meet him, looking over at the door and shrugging. It's just an open door, Buck. Use your sensors to see if there is any... Kron paused as he shifted his eyes up toward the top of the building. Second thought, don't use your sensors. Why not? Asked Buck. Because your eyes will do just fine, said Kron as he noticed Rami Darigaz standing in the window next to a young, blond man. Buck, Ancient, and Red all looked up at the building to see their target standing in plain sight. Each member of the squadron raised their weapons up and locked them onto Rami Darigaz. Kron, do we open fire? Asked Red as he aimed for the center of Rami Darigaz's skull. Kron paused as he looked at the 2 men standing at the window. Why is that guy still alive? He thought as he looked through his visor and over the sight on his rifle. Kron exhaled slowly through his pursed lips. All soldiers, hold your fire. Until the guy next to him is dead, do not fire upon the target, Kron commanded through his headset. Buck, Red, Ancient, listen to me. Our objective is now to subdue the guy that is with him. Subdue and detain him for questioning. Confirm? Confirm, Kron, said Ancient quickly, still looking through his visor and over the sight at Rami Darigaz. Aye, Red and Buck responded simultaneously. Kron kept his eyes trained on Remy Derrigaz as he composed himself and strategized on the fly. All other Poe units, surround this building. If he comes out without the other man with him, unleash hell. Ancient tilted his head slightly. Kron, you're going to force him to jump into the rafters, he announced softly, speaking directly to Kron. Maybe, but I'm hoping to serve him up to our friend on the roof, replied Kron with determination and guile. He knew what he was trying to do, and he knew Victor wanted one more chance to take this guy down. This was his chance to flush the Outlander to the roof, where Victor would happily oblige. David flew the air transport over the building, watching closely to what was happening on the ground. Victor and Justin remained in their seats as David lowered the air transport slightly to try and get a good look at the other man in the building. I'm going to try and see if I can get a good scan on that guy, announced David as he hovered the air transport just in front of the building. The weapons of the air transport were locked onto Remy Derrigaz, but as they heard the chatter from Kron on the street, they knew not to engage. Sensors are scanning the other guy standing beside him, announced David from the cockpit. Victor and Justin leaned forward and trained their eyes on the screens. After a few short moments, information appeared which Justin was happy to read aloud through the headset, relaying the information to Kron and the others in the street. Looks like his name is Zach, a young guy who lives in the Q quadrant, though he hasn't been seen there in some time. There are quite a few warrants out for his arrest and he is a suspected syndicate sympathizer, announced Justin. Victor sighed upon reading and listening to Justin. Hearing that the young man standing beside Remy Derrigaz was in bed with the syndicate was not ideal, as it would mean every Poe soldier would take him out before they could extract any information from him. More information is coming, continued Justin as it appeared on the screen. He's one of the kids they saved from the streets upon the foundation of Eden. He was brought in, joined Poe, and defected after a year. Victor groaned loudly. Stop reading, Justin. This can't get any better for this guy. Justin shifted his eyes over to Victor and shrugged. It could explain why this guy is alive. And it could be motivation for the people on the ground to cause an accident, countered Victor. He stared at the building, noticing how their target was starting to move away from the window. And now he's moving away, muttered Victor. He reached up and pressed a button in the headset in his ear. Kron, are you seeing this? Victor looked through the window as Remy Derrigaz stepped away from the glass, leaving Zach standing there watching the Poe soldiers in the street. Yeah, I see it, Victor, replied Kron from the ground, echoing into Victor's headset. We've got several squadrons surrounding the building. We'll either surround him and subdue him down here, or flush him up to the roof. David brought the air transport up a few feet to the top of the building where he, Justin, and Victor could watch. They had to see where the Outlander's next move would be, and after a few short moments, he obliged. The door to the roof opened with the blinding lights from inside announcing his entrance. Remy Derrigaz, the Outlander, the Butcher of Soda City, emerged from within the building with several air transports watching on. Kron had instructed several squadrons to surround the building, but it didn't matter. Remy Derrigaz made his way up to the roof. Still holding his sword in his right hand, he stepped onto the firm surface to watch an air transport descend slowly. The door opened while it hovered in the air, with a single Poe soldier, not clad in any heavy armor, emerging. Victor descended a few feet onto the roof, where he landed easily. He kept his eyes trained on Remy Derrigaz, knowing how quickly he could strike, especially when cornered. The Outlander was dangerous, but Victor was ready to subdue him. He reached behind his back and pressed a small button on one of his chips. Instantly, Victor felt a surge of power coursing through his muscles and his bones. He felt an awkward tension, followed by a rush of adrenaline. Victor pulled his hand out from behind his back and stood up straight, trying to project power and confidence toward his opponent. The two on the rooftop locked eyes. The blue hue in Victor's eyes met the Outlander's yellow, with each refusing to speak. Tension mounted, but it was fleeting. The battle was soon to begin, and both warriors were primed to defeat the other. The Outlander made the first move. Remy Derrigaz lunged forward with his sword prepared to slice at Victor's abdomen. Victor, staring down the brim of his nose, smirked as he watched the muscles twinge and bones shift in the Outlander's body. His chips were running at maximum capacity, and now, with all of Poe watching, he was prepared to show off. Time moved slowly as Victor watched the sword come toward him. With a quick twitch, he pushed himself to the side with his right leg, avoiding the blade as it sliced the air beside him. While strafing to the side, Victor raised his right hand and quickly jabbed Remy Derrigaz in the chest. The Outlander was pushed backwards slightly. He held his sword in his right hand and he tried to swing it to prevent Victor from charging forward. However, Victor's speed was too much. The cybernetic enhancements were doing their job, and Victor was faster than the blade of Remy Derrigaz. As the Outlander moved backwards, Victor swung his left arm around to land a haymaker, going for the knockout blow with one punch. Remy Derrigaz, however, was far too quick and experienced to be taken out with a single punch. With a deft move, he dodged the punch and lunged back at Victor, sword raised high. Victor barely had time to react as he realized he was now in grave danger. He had underestimated his opponent and overestimated his prowess and abilities. Nevertheless, on that rooftop, Remy Derrigaz and Victor were equals. Where the Outlander had slayed hundreds of innocent civilians and post soldiers, he could not easily best Victor. With his enhanced speed and strength, he was able to keep pace with Remy Derrigaz, dodging his sword strikes and landing a few punches of his own. The two continued to fight fiercely on the rooftop as Justin looked on in David's air transport. With the soldiers on the ground watching the feed through their visors, each member on the street was enamored with how Victor moved and how his speed and power matched the butcher of Soda City. Every attack Remy Derrigaz tried to use against Victor missed, though Victor was unable to land many counterattacks. What punches Victor was able to land, though, was having an effect against the Outlander. Victor knew that he had to end this fight before Remy Derrigaz had a chance to demonstrate his true strength and power. As he weaved through the Outlander's sword strikes, Victor's eyes locked onto his opponent's wrist. He noticed that the Outlander's grip on the sword was starting to loosen, and he knew that it was time to strike. At that moment, Victor made his move. With lightning-fast reflexes, he darted forward and grabbed the hilt of the sword with his bare hand. Remy Derrigaz tried to resist, but Victor's enhanced strength proved too much for him. Victor wrenched the sword from his hand, dropping it on the rooftop with a clang. The blade rattled against the ground with Victor using his left hand to jab Remy Derrigaz in the face. Bone crunched underneath Victor's knuckles as he held onto the Outlander's wrist, as his body propelled backwards from the brutal force. Victor pulled him forward and drove his left fist squarely into Remy Derrigaz's jaw. Blood sprayed into the air from the punch, with the force jarring the Outlander out of Victor's grip and several feet away along the rooftop. Remy Derrigaz's body thudded hard against the ground. His body bounced a few feet before eventually landing against the edge of the building. "I think it's time we end this," said Victor as he strutted forward. He had defeated the Outlander, and now he was going to finish him. Victor had already prepared himself to kill the Outlander in cold blood. There was no scenario where he could arrest him. He was far too powerful for the jails, and he would quickly defeat the guards. Remy Derrigaz had to die on that rooftop. As he moved toward his prey, Victor felt the power from the cybernetics beginning to wane. He had experienced a plethora of raw power, but now he could feel that it was coming to an end. But Victor wasn't done yet. He had one last surge of energy left in him, and he was going to use it to finish what he started. He raised his right fist and prepared to drive it into the skull of Remy Derrigaz, when suddenly, several explosions detonated throughout the city. Victor glanced up as the air transports that surrounded them turned to see what the commotion was. Smoke billowed up into the rafters in several locations. With his attention drawn away from his prey, Remy Derrigaz raised his boot and drove it into Victor's sternum. The post soldier gasped for air as Remy Derrigaz scampered to his feet and over to his sword. With Victor turning to face him, the Outlander sprinted away from him and leapt up into the rafters and over to another rooftop. The air transports turned and tried to follow him, but he disappeared into a building. Victor was hunched over, trying to calm his breathing. The kick from Remy Derrigaz was firm and powerful, almost as powerful as one of Victor's punches. The distraction was all the Outlander needed to escape. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out an earpiece. He placed it in his right ear and pressed the blue button. "Status report!" shouted Victor as he tried to control his breathing. "Do we have eyes on him?" He waited for a moment before rising to his feet. "No, Vic, we lost him," replied Justin through the earpiece. Victor hung his head in shame, feeling incredibly weak from the battle and the overexertion. "But we got the guy he was with. We have Zach and we are taking him to headquarters." Victor sighed loudly and nodded. "Good. I'd really like to have a word or two with him."